So my name's Lynn Wyeth. I'm the Head of Information Governance and Risk at Leicester City Council. Been doing it for, when did FOI come in? January 2005, so 13 years. Because what I didn't know was when they gave me freedom of information, I also did data protection, but no one bothered to tell me. And the first time the central office rang up and said, how many Section 29 requests have you had? I'm looking at my FOI exemptions, going, oh no, we don't get them. And they went, no, Section 29 under the Data Protection Act. And I was like, what do I know about data protection? And I think a lot of us fall into it, don't we? You don't grow up wanting to be a data protection officer. Anyone disagree? Did you go to your careers advisor at 16 and go, oh, I really, really want to do data protection? I think Chris Pounder might have done, but that's about it. We all fall into it. It gets tagged onto our job, usually in a review, when we're put into another job that we can't do and we have no skills and knowledge and experience of. But they had to find somewhere to redeploy us to rather than make us redundant. So, been doing that for years. I hated it. Let's be honest, hated it with a passion, spent about 2 years going, I hate it. This legislation is the worst written legislation I've ever seen in my life. It's ridiculous. It goes back on itself, it refers to itself, there's principles, there's schedules, there's clauses, and none of it makes any sense. And then suddenly one day you wake up, don't you, and you have that epiphany where it just clicks and you go, oh, I get it. No, you've not got there yet? It takes a while. You either learn to love it and turn into a geek, or you run a mile and you get another job pretty quickly. So how many people in here are currently doing data protection officer type role for their organisation? How many think they might get dumped with this after May and be the data protection officer? How many are here hoping I'll tell you how to get out of it and it couldn't possibly be you? Yeah, few. Let's have a look at what the criteria is. So data protection officer, as most of you probably know in the room, is going to be mandatory for some organisations. Obviously public authorities, it's a big fat tick. It's dead obvious, we're all in. That's easy for us, isn't it? It's really complicated for other organisations. Our partner organisations that we're working with have no idea whether they're covered or not. Are we large scale? I don't know, are we high risk? Who knows? And some of the sort of medium businesses, you either know you are or you know you're definitely not, and there's a whole raft in between that have no idea if this applies to them. And it must be a bit of a nightmare trying to decide whether it does. So what does the data protection officer do? We know we've got to have one. Why are they there? So they're there to enable compliance. You're there to help and foster this culture, give advice. You're not there to do it all yourself, and you're certainly not there to make the decisions. The accountability does not sit with you. It still sits with those senior managers, those information asset owners and the CSIRO. You're there to advise them. If they ignore you, you write down that they've ignored you. It's still their decision making. You're there in an advisory role. And to promote data protection throughout your organisation, you will not be personally responsible as a data protection officer if anything goes wrong, like now. Very few personal sanctions under data protection currently, not a lot changing going forward under the bill. The old Section 55 offence of, deliberately, accessing data you shouldn't and selling it and that kind of stuff's still going to be there. The new one about re-identifying data. But it will always be your organisation, the data controller, that the EY's going to be coming after, giving enforcement notices to, giving the civil monetary penalties to. Definitely not you individually. Now, this time round it applies to processors as well as controllers. That opens up a whole load of questions about contracts. Do you know if your contractor, your processor, needs one or not? Is it for you to assess whether they meet that criteria, or is it up to them? It's kind of up to them, but if you can see someone that isn't compliant and you think you're definitely processing a heck of a lot of health records, I think you need one, and they're going, no we don't, it's going to set alarm bells ringing in that sort of tender and bidding process, I would imagine, and you might want to be asking the right questions in tender documentation to your contractors to see whether they've got one, whether they can give you a named contact, etc. So public authority, definitely. And then the core activities is regular and systematic monitoring on a large scale. No definitions in the regulation, are there? We're all kind of going, what's that mean? And we've had a little bit of guidance and advice from the Article 29 Working Party about some of this. Little snippets like when you think large scale, don't just think about numbers. Don't focus on whether it's tens or hundreds of thousands of records. Large scale could mean geographic spread. So if I'm working with a small local charity, maybe not. But as soon as that charity becomes a national or even international charity, are we tipping into this? Who knows what the definitions are going to be? And regular and systematic, so you know the Facebooks of the world, profiling your views every second, or CCTV cameras in shopping centres, watching all that footfall. Some are going to be really obvious, others not so easy to tell whether they need them. And then the other one that'll get caught by it, that you might partner with or contract to, large-scale special categories, so our new sensitive categories, all the categories we had before, plus biometric and genetic. If they're large scale, they might get caught by this. So it might be a one-man band in his hired warehouse, but he might be scanning hundreds of thousands of medical records every week, him and his mate, you know, and it might be captured by that. We just don't know exactly where that cut-off point's going to be. So, do you need a full-time one? Do you need a part-time one? A bit of one? More than one? Controversial. One with a very big team? Possibly. Lots of different options for setting this data protection officer up. Now, councils are sometimes in a better position than some organisations because, like you guys in this room, a lot of you have already got someone who it looks like it might already sit with. We've got those structures set up, we've got those roles and responsibilities set up. Other organisations have got nothing. And they're with this blank piece of paper going, how do I do one? Where do I get one from? How many hours a week do they need? How much do I pay them? What's the job description? It's chaos for some people out there. But you can appoint, as I said in the presentation earlier, one person to more than one organisation. So you might get a group of borough and district councils in an area clubbed together. You might think I only need one between us. Maybe. You might be thinking I need one each, but they're not going to fund it. Who knows? For us at Leicester, we've kind of gone with it being me. Nobody else wanted it, let's be honest. And I'm doing it as part of another job. And that's where we get into that single role or part of another role as well. Are they just going to be the data protection officer, whether it's full-time, a part-time, a shared one, or a consultant you've got in, or are they going to be doing something else? And a lot of the time in councils we get it tagged onto our job and we're all already doing something else, whether it's freedom of information or complaints or something else bizarre. How many of you do a purely data protection officer's job? And how many of you do something else wrapped around it? That's pretty general for a council, isn't it? Now, you need to be clear about whether you can carry on doing that or whether it's this conflict of interest. Senior management do not like this at all because it's starting to reduce down who can do the job. Because that conflict of interest, we've had guidance and advice from the Article 29 Working Party on that one. If you look at their notes on it, it's very clear. There's a footnote which makes it crystal clear. It cannot be the CIRO, the Senior Information Risk Officer. It cannot be the Caldecott Guardian. It cannot be a head of service if they're determining how to process data in their area. So senior manager or director or someone at board level. Because they're responsible for that data in their service. And the data protection officer needs to look in to check they're doing it properly. You can't look in on yourself. So I queried with the ICO whether I would have to split my job. So as head of information governance and risk, I don't just do data protection, I do freedom of information, I do RIPA, so the surveillance, I'm the RIPA monitoring officer for organisations that do that, I do open data, transparency, and I said surely, particularly for freedom of information, I'm a head of service, I'm determining how to process that data, I've procured an IT system to log it, who's going to check that I've procured that IT? Oh no, they said, it's fine, it's fine. It complements it. I'm going with that. That works for me. I have it in writing, so we're going with it. We think it's because, where's Stacey? She's spying on us. The ICO want their head of risk to be their data protection officer. So it kind of works for them as well. But I can see why they could justify it a little bit, because it is about that compliance and auditing role. Although I do manage the freedom of information function, technically it's the service area's data, you could argue. So you do have to think about that conflict. Now, a lot of people that I've seen going around training, management are resisting this. They don't want to give that power to people lower down the organisation where a lot of us sit. They want it to be that board level. They're not willing to pay you guys to be at board level, because at first we thought some of these DPOs would have to be elevated up there. But again, it's clear in the guidance that it can be at a lower level. But what they need to do is give you access to board level. So they don't necessarily have to pay you a whole load of money, but they're just a little bit nervous about this DPO role suddenly having these kind of new powers of being able to access data, sit in meetings, read minutes, etc. So if they do start saying, no, it's got to be the CIRO, it's got to be the head of IT, blow them out of the water with the Article 29 Working Party guidance. It's very clear in there that those people cannot be it. And you can put a team around. We're all sloshing around with resources. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? I'm lucky. I've got a team of 5 people. Essex have got, is it 15? 20. Essex have got 20. Kent have got a lot. They're massive counties with millions of people. You can understand why. A lot of you, it's just you. Isn't it? Just you. But you can, in theory, push for some sort of resource to help you do that and create some sort of team around you. Can't hold a position where you're determining the purpose of processing the data. There's the list there. Can't be section 151. Sometimes it might be a monitoring officer if they're in that sort of audit role, but if they were also head of your legal services, I don't see how they can be, because they're determining all the purposes of that processing in the whole of legal services. You could take one solicitor out potentially, who then isn't involved in deciding anything, and they could be it, but we'll look at why they might not be the best fit in a minute as well. And this is it. Who can do the job? So we've narrowed down who can actually do it, as in we've taken out all those senior managers and people with conflicts of interest. But these are then the necessary sort of skill sets and knowledge that you need to be able to do the job. Expertise in national European data protection laws and practice. Now, expertise, no definition. You go in front of a judge. If he wants an expert, he's talking 10,000 hours. We're talking years of experience. Not you've been doing it for 6 months and gone on a 4-day course. Years. Now that's going to be impossible. There are not enough out there. There are not 28,000 or however many we need. So we're going to have to fudge that one a little bit, and you're going to have to say you've got expertise pretty quickly. But it's that practice that's really important for me as well. We've seen a lot of solicitors pop up. Any solicitors in the room before I slag you all off? Hey! Where you've got solicitors that specialise in data protection, they are stunning. You see the people from 11 KBW, they are brilliant, top of their game. It's a real strand of law that is developing and brilliant. But we've seen an awful lot of solicitors and legal firms seeing the money behind this and going, oh, let's get someone to specialise in this. They can read the legislation, they can learn GDPR, probably a lot quicker than us. They don't have the practical experience. Where's the expertise in redacting subject access requests and reporting an investigated breach to the Information Commissioner's Office? That's where they fall down. They're not doers. They're not the practitioners that we are on the front line. So again, it's hard for them to sometimes justify ticking that box there. You're also supposed to know the business sector you're in. So you should know how local government works, the legislation that local government runs on. And that's a really interesting one, because how do you move around to other sectors? Could I go and be a data protection officer for the police? I don't know anything about the police and their systems. I don't want to. Health I could, because I've worked with them a lot on the electronic record sharing, and I feel like I've lived and breathed health for the last few years, but I know nothing about police, nothing about, IT industry. Can you move around in the sectors? That's going to be an interesting discussion to have. And you've got to have integrity and high professional ethics. Sign up to the Nolan principles. It says you've got to report to senior management. Now, when this first came out, we got a little bit excited, didn't we? We thought, if we've got to be line managed by the chief exec, surely we'll get a pay rise. We'll be at board level. Brilliant. They blew it out the water and said, no, we don't mean line managed by. It just means having that access to the open door policy, sitting in some meetings, reading the minutes, being aware of everything that goes on in the organisation. You've got to be omnipresent and know everything. Now, I love that because I'm nosy, but it is information overload. You have to get quite skilled at just getting loads of stuff sent to you and being able to skim and pick up the bit where you go, you're doing what where? Have you done a data protection impact assessment on that? Because I don't recall seeing one. That kind of thing. So they are supposed to involve you in a timely manner, not, we've got this contract going live tomorrow, is it okay? Have you already signed it? Yeah, too late, mate. And that's the whole point of the data protection impact assessment stuff, to get in early and start involving you early so that you can advise them and tell them what they should and shouldn't be doing. So that is your job, informing and advising. Not doing, not be responsible for. But I guess you do a lot of that now. Some of it will fall on deaf ears, some of it won't. So a data protection officer needs to build up that trust, that respect, working with colleagues so that they know you're not always against them, you're trying to help them, and you build up that relationship. And again, that can take a long time. That's not something that happens, overnight. Sometimes it can take a long time for them to even believe what you're saying. How many times do you tell your authority over and over again, and then they get an external trainer, they tell them, and they go, we have to do this, and you're going, I've been saying that for 2 years. And sometimes they need that validation until they really realise that you know what you're talking about. The other job for the DPO is about providing advice and checking these data protection impact assessments. So how many people here currently do privacy impact assessments as part of their organisational processes? Starting to embed it, try and catch them all. It's tricky, isn't it? It's still quite a bit of work to do there. When we first saw this, we thought, data protection officer is going to have to be doing even more privacy impact assessments. You're looking at the finished product, so who's writing it? So you've got your service area, but as we all know, anyone who's ever done one, they need data protection input. They don't understand the principles and what they're running it against. So you're probably going to be looking at still someone in your team or in IG somewhere who's got to input into that DPIA with the service area, with IT, consulting, contractors, whoever, the public, depends how big it is and how well you want to do it, before you as the data protection officer get your hands on it and go, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Looks fantastic. Tick, or, oh no, this is massive, it's high risk, it's going to have to go to the Information Commissioner's office. We really don't want that to happen. So they're going to be an interesting new process for the DPO. You do have to be that liaison with the Information Commissioner's office. Some of you might be already, or they might take that out of your hands and do it at a high level. I don't know. You might do all the legwork and it goes off in someone else's name, or you might already be the person dealing with reporting incidents, getting decision notices back. That's formalised, that they only contact you and you deal with them confidentially. And then monitoring compliance with the policies, etc. Check that they're all doing what you've told them they should be doing. Okay, who's got law enforcement powers in their councils? I think it's pretty much anybody, isn't it? County, borough, unitary, whatever. Someone somewhere will have a little bit, whether it's trading standards or licensing or fraud or anywhere you can interview under PACE and have prosecution powers is what we think is falling into this. So it lists in the bill competent authorities, And the only one that really fits the bracket there is youth offending teams, if you've got them. But then the second category is about, can you prosecute? Do you interview under pace? And if you do, that's when that kicks in of when you're doing it for those prosecution powers, you're using Part 3 of the Data Protection Bill instead of GDPR. You're doing it under the Law Enforcement Directive. And there are extra tasks for the Data Protection Officer in that part of the bill specifically. They've got to assign responsibilities under policy, so you've got to be very clear who's doing what if they're prosecuting using that data. More awareness raising of them, and it actually says training staff. Now, I don't know if anybody has had a look at that yet, if you've got law enforcement. Do you interpret that as, instead of telling the organisation they must train their staff, is it the data protection officer is actually responsible for training the staff in those law enforcement areas? Anybody got a thought on that? I think it's a little bit open to interpretation, that one. I'm kind of erring towards having to train them. Yay. Might bump your job evaluation score up. Could be a bonus. But I think we need clarity on that particularly. And it also mentions about conducting audits, specifically as the data protection officer for prosecution powers. I'm not an auditor, I'm not a trained auditor. Does it mean an official audit? Do I have to be trained in how to audit properly? Or is it literally my back of a fact packet as I do now, checklist audit? Who knows? So queries about that one.
Could you instruct your internal audit team to do that?
Don't know. That's the question, I think. Does it mean that the DPO has to actually do it themselves, or can they delegate? I guess if you've got a team around you, you could delegate. So perhaps you could delegate as long as you tell your audit what to do.
Are you internal auditor? I've got two hats here. I'm an internal auditor and leading our GDPR project team. Internal auditors, they would need some training in that.
Exactly. Auditors don't know data protection, and data protection people don't know how to do a proper audit. Yeah, so there needs to be some work done there. But these links are amazing. It's going really well. In order to do that, you can ask for CPD. If I think it's what it means that I have to do the auditing, and it needs to be a bit more formalised, and I need to, really cover my back that I'm doing it properly, I'm supposed to be able to get the CPD that I need as a data protection officer. The council has to let you go on training courses and networking, etc., to keep your skills and knowledge up to date. And I would imagine in the first couple of years that's going to be, a bit as more decisions and case law comes out and things are being tweaked. We're all going to still be learning over the first couple of years. They should provide the resources necessary to carry out their tasks. How many people are going to go to their chief exec with a business plan on the 26th of May saying they need new staff? Because that's what it actually says in the legislation. You should be able to ask for the resources you need. Now, you will have to justify your need, obviously, with a business case, etc. We all know what the financial situation is in local government. That's going to go down like a lead balloon, isn't it? But what I think it really does protect you from is further cuts when they try and slash yet another top slicing and another member of staff's got to be made redundant. Really resist it with that. They shouldn't tell you what to do. You are totally independent. Again, the reality of working in a political environment is not always that easy. You're going to have to do a lot of negotiation and sweet talking. Picking your fights, playing politics with a little p in some organisations. It's going to be tricky. You'll have to have, certain people skills to be able to juggle this. And they shouldn't be able to get rid of you or penalise you in any way for doing your DPO job. So those tasks under the articles, they cannot, in theory, get rid of you for. If they say to me, do not report that data breach to the ICO, and I say, sorry mate, more than my job's worth, I'm reporting it, they could not sack me for that. Now, we all know in reality they can try and get rid of you in different ways, but it is really hard to get rid of a statutory officer. Has anybody here ever tried to get rid of their monitoring or 151 officer? They don't go, do they? It's really hard. This is us now. Yep.
But it's not an immunity from being sacked.
No. So if I punch my chief exec on the nose, that's fair game. I'm gone. No.
Really, so, I mean, if you don't perform your task as a DPO up to the previous slides in terms of expertise, then surely you can be dismissed.
Yeah, so they can find reasons to say you don't meet the criteria, I would imagine, and on all sorts of capability stuff they could try and get you with there. But if you're meeting the criteria and you're doing your job, they shouldn't be able to get rid of you.
Use the phrase that DPO is a statutory officer, but it's not, in essence, a statutory officer is who would understand the term in local government, because chief exec is, the finance officer is, the monitoring officer is, and they're clearly defined in legislation.
Well, this is now defined in legislation under GDPR that you have to have one. So
necessarily create specific employment law protection for the chief exec, for a finance officer. You've got to go through a particular procedure. So there seems to be, although you have created it, they've not bottomed out in individual domestic legislation how you create that employment.
But why would we need domestic legislation when it's a regulation? It just flips over. By law, you have to have one of these.
Yeah, I would support the point that this is a statutory function that's protected by law.
Yeah.
Just like, for example, in social care complaints, there's a statutory complaints manager, which is supported by law.
What do you have to do with the data protection officer's details? You have to publish how you can contact your data protection officer. That's one of the downsides. But the ICO has indicated, kind of off the record, I don't know whether they've said to any of you guys, that can just be a generic email address. They're not expecting full names, direct telephone numbers, etc., because they know that just means we get inundated and have to wade through stuff. So we've already set up our generic email address of data.protection.officer@leicester.gov.uk, which will be published. And you have to tell the ICO who that is. So that's pretty straightforward. What about all our friends? Oh, some of them are having a nightmare. Schools, who's got schools? Who's leaving them to their own thing? Who's trying to help them? It's difficult, isn't it? So you've got different data controllers potentially that you feel like you're a little bit responsible for. Schools are a classic. They have their own data controller, but if they're locally maintained, you're kind of going, oh, should I be doing something? What about other data controllers that you have within your own organisation? We don't just register the council, do we? Electoral Services, Youth Offending Team, Safeguarding Children's Board. We don't even go there with the councillors. Registrars. So we've got about half a dozen. Do I have to become the data protection officer for all those as well? I raised that when they started doing the job evaluation, as you do. So that's a debate to be had. Don't just... I said that I currently act as the data protection officer for youth offending, electoral register and registrars, because they're seen very much as our staff and they all work to our policies. I said, but I'm not touching the safeguarding board or the coroners with a barge pole because I have no idea what they do and just not anything to do with us, really. So there's that debate to be had there, I think. Shared services, who's going to do data protection officer for shared services? If you suddenly do a shared service with all the councils and they've all got a DPO each, what's going to happen there? Think about that. Commissioning services. We mentioned whether you need to check in your contracts if they've got a DPO. The other thing that we thought about as well, just before I forget and my 5 minutes is up, if going back to that idea of it's got to be in there by law, what happens when you're on leave? Because our monitoring officer has a deputy who acts up and actually gets an annual honorarium. So I'm fully expecting my deputy to be given an honorarium for when I'm off, because someone needs to be in that post for that time. So another extra cost for your organisation potentially. We have been doing bits and bobs on K-Hub, as Tim has alluded to earlier, where we've been uploading things. People have been uploading their ideas of DPO job descriptions. I think we've stuck one of ours up there. Mine's just gone through job evaluation, and for a large unitary council, it's come out at about 55 to 60k. And a lot of our health colleagues are coming out at 8A to 8C, which again goes up to about 65. So those are the sort of ballpark figures we're talking about for big councils, I think, which, you know, obviously compares with 150k in the city for for the banks. But that's where things are kind of being pitched.
Is that looking at your role? Everything else?
All of it. And that's why I get the points. Yeah, if it's a standalone DPO, it'd be nowhere near, and I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. Yeah, you got to think about recruitment, retaining, because people will be headhunted, definitely, within the public sector.
So was that a pay rise for you?
Yes. Yay! 1 whole grade. I had to fight for it. I threatened to quit twice. Yeah.
I'm really interested in your view. The health and safety structure already has a very similar idea to this. The health and safety manager has direct access to the chief executive. For those who are struggling to get our local authorities to understand that the SIRO is not allowed to do it, do you think it's worth referring to the health and safety structure?
Yeah. It's a similar thing. It's the audit rule, so they've got to have access to everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in internal audit, as part of our standard, we have to have access, free and unlimited access to senior management, to members, to anyone we want, really.
That's my number 2 at Leicester, Ian. He did the first course up in Manchester. He's probably your best bet to contact if you want anything from Leicester rather than me. He's there more than I am. But anything on K-Hub that we upload you can use. We're going to put stuff on our website for people to comment on. We're doing guidance and advice for schools at the moment that we're going to share, because we want feedback. We haven't got the answers. This is all new. You know, if you can improve on what we've done, we want to hear your ideas. So I hope that was a quick whiz through our thoughts on the DPO, and be interesting to know when we have a chat sort of in the breaks, etc., whether you agree with them or not, I suppose. So thank you very much.